Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. This is another one of our series of conversations in regards to the coal mining situation in the province of Alberta. As any followers of the show will know, we've made this sort of a centerpiece for an entire month now. But I'm very, very excited to welcome to the program today our next guest because he's got a whole lot of dog in this fight, and he's got a whole lot of experience that is very, very relevant to the conversation. With all of that said, I'm very, very excited to welcome to the show Mr. Bill Trafford. Mr. Trafford, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, I appreciate being here, Nate. Thank you for having me.
So to start with, before we get into the coal mining piece, because I suspect for you, it's going to be a little bit more of a bigger conversation, just given your history with it. He alluded to carefully. Before we get into that, who is Bill Trafford?
Sure. So I'm a native Albertan. I have a very large family here in Calgary, and we've been recreating, I guess, in the Rockies since I was about 1 year old. And so a long, long history of that. I ended up leaving Calgary for a period of time on my career in the US and other parts of Canada. Came back and realized I have two brothers that have bought land down in the southwestern Alberta along the edge of the Livingston Range, and one near over to where I am on Porcupine Hills. So started riding and getting to know everybody down there. And just, like everybody that's down there, you just fall in love. So we bought a fairly large piece of property, built a home, and now we kind of share between Calgary and down there. And as part of my indoctrination, if you will, one of my neighbors was one of the founding members of the Livingstone Landowners Group. And they did me a huge favor by making sure that our property wasn't intruded upon by a company that was doing exploration for gas on my land. And so I was awarded a fairly significant amount of money to recompense me for what they did. And so I donated the money to LL Livingstone Landowners Group because they were the ones that really helped me with it. And ever since then, so that was over 20 years ago, I've been involved with the Livingstone Landowner Group on a number of issues. Our mandate is, we're not environmentalists, but we are conservationists and really truly believe that any development that occurs has to be done in a reasonable, responsible way. And as part of that, so we dealt with the sour gas wells that were planned for down there. And we then moved on to transmission lines. And so we've had a number of discussions and hearings with the transmission companies on how they want to build transmission lines. And I would say they were good discussions because they were certainly with the transmission lines, the company building them eventually came around to our way of thinking about how and where you should put those transmission lines. So that was a success. And then one of our members brought up the whole issue of coal back in 2019, and nobody really believed it, right? And he eventually convinced us that because all of the area that we represent has the Oldman River flowing right through it, that this was a serious issue to us. So we decided that we would take it on. And we eventually were given standing in the hearings. So we had hired a lawyer and expert witnesses, and we were active participants in the original Grassy Mountain hearings. And it was really problematic for us because it took enormous amounts of time. And the one thing you find out really quickly is the other side is getting paid to be there. And you're all just standing there, hoping you can keep the lights on at home while you're doing all this, right? So it's a huge amount of time and effort. And but we felt this was absolutely worth it. And I think we raised enormous amounts of money from the public to support us that we never even believed we could get. So that was how that went. And the outcome of it was obviously that the Joint Review Panel rejected it, and they rejected it essentially on two grounds. First was the environmental impact, and they said essentially that the environmental impact could not be remediated, could not be fixed by the proposals that the coal company had. And the secondary reason was the economics just didn't match up to the potential risk of what would happen. So we were happy about that. As partway just towards after the hearings adjourned, I was asked to be part of the Coal Policy Committee along with four other people. Four, one, two, three, four, yeah. And mandated by the Minister of Energy to talk to as many Albertans and stakeholders as we could to come up with recommendations for what a new coal policy would look like. And just quick backtrack, it is a long story, but I don't know, other people might have spoken to it, but along the way, shortly after, while the Grassy Mountain hearings were going on in May of 2020, the government rescinded the 1976 coal policy. And that's really just threw up the anchors on everybody. And they went, the public went completely. I don't think the government ever expected to see a public reaction like that ever. So that's when they thought their way out of it would be to put in place this Coal Policy Committee, and they could go out and assuage the public and listen to everybody's angst. And so personally, I thought when I was asked, my first reaction was, so they want me to go out there and be a punching bag and get beat up right across Alberta by everybody, and then they'll get off the hook, right? So I did sort of think about that, and I did actually ask the minister at the time, Sonia Savage, and said, "Is that your intent?" And she said, "Absolutely not. We truly want to hear from Albertans and stakeholders about how they feel about coal and what they think a coal policy should look like." So it took, I think, almost 7 months to do it. And the first thing, there was a survey of all Albertans, of anybody that wanted to weigh in on what they thought about coal mining in the Eastern Slopes. And the result was staggering. 70% said there's no way they should be mining coal on Eastern Slopes. So that was a broad survey done just when we started. So that sort of got our interest, because you think, well, what is it that's bothering people? I know, but and so the whole approach to the coal policy was not for Bill Trafford or the other members of the committee to write down their thoughts about what should happen. It was really truly go out and talk. So we talked to, I mean, the numbers are like was still a kind of a nightmare of traveling and talking and meeting, but everybody, indigenous groups, coal companies, townships, MDs, individuals, experts, all. So I think, literally I think we did about 1,000, discussions, interviews, papers, and so on. So we really, really got and then we actually went and visited the proposed mines down in southern Alberta, but also the active ones up in the Hinton area. So the result of all that was pretty simple. The report's available, so we ended up with 8 principal recommendations, and those recommendations were fully accepted and unanimously accepted by the government at the time. Jason Kenney and his caucus and his ministers all accepted it as the this is what we should do. Um, so that was delivered in early 2021, and then it basically sat for 3 years, 4 years almost, and then lo and behold, the new Minister of Energy um, kind of decided that really coal mining was a really good thing, and he essentially allowed the Grassy Mountain mine begin again their open pit coal mine in southwest Alberta. So that's kind of where this whole thing kind of arose from. And so now we're back where we were in 2020 when they rescinded the 1976 coal policy. So same idea, right? Now they've reopened the door to at least 5 open pit coal mines on the eastern slopes. So if you want to know the magnitude of 5 open pit coal mine, you don't have to look very far. The Elk Valley is just slightly west, and these coal mines would be roughly the same size as that Elk Valley operation is today. So I don't know if you've ever seen a picture of it, but it's, you know, mountaintop removal, it's open pit coal mining, and it's got huge, huge problems with selenium water. And, bad enough that the citizens of Fernie now have one of their water supplies that's been contaminated and they've got to find another water supply. So that's serious when you start, impacting individuals with that. Uh, I'm trying to think where I the so they so what the minister has done. First of all, he removed the moratorium on coal mining applications on the eastern slopes, reinstated the 1976 coal policy, and then did one of the most bizarre wave his hands and try and make you believe something that I've ever seen in my life. So they came out with their um, Coal Industry Modernization Initiative, CIMI, back. And I don't know if you ever watched that, but basically they said all the things you're laughing. So they basically said, oh, by the way, we're going to never allow our water to be damaged, no selenium in the water, no open pit coal mining, no mountaintop removal. Don't worry, everything's going to be okay. And meanwhile, so they said they're going to start on that. And, you go, well, what happened to the coal policy recommendations that said the first thing you need to do is a proper landscape analysis to understand what you actually can do on that landscape. And given that you want to do more than just, the tourism, forestry, mining, all the things you want to do, you can't possibly do that, let everybody do everything they want on that landscape. So you need a proper evaluation of that. And that theoretically should have fallen under the work by the Department of Environment using the Alberta Land Stewardship Act, which has things like the regional plans in it. And that's how you actually get the legislation for what you can or can't do. That's the proper process. They've decided that's not really great, news or announcement worthy. So they came up with this Coal Industry Modernization Initiative. So what's absolutely shocking about it is they want to come up with a set of regulations that determine what you can do in a coal mine. So that's all well and good. And that sounded great, right? But the problem is it's going to take them at least a year and maybe longer to do it. Like they can't, And B, they said they're going to do it in consultation with the coal industry. So to me, two things have happened. One is you've put the fox in with the chickens for sure, and B, you've bought a whole bunch of time for these coal companies to reapply for mines under the old coal policy. So, the regulations are only going to apply once they're fully committed in legislation. Um, but in the meantime, it's open season. Like, and we know for sure from the hearings on the Grassy Mountain exploration permits that the Northback people are already putting their mining application into the Alberta Energy Regulator. So, it's like I said before, it's sort of wave this thing over here about this, CIMI, and then, oh, by the way, let all these guys in the back door to do their dirty work, right? So that's kind of where it's at. And the part, and I know you've talked to Lauren and others on your show, but the real two issues are really simple. It's about water and it's about economics. And so I'll talk a little bit about the water side of it, and I'm sure you heard others, but essentially, there is no method known to remove the selenium out of the water from an open pit coal mine. So, if you heard the minister talk about it when asked, well, we're confident new technology will help, right? And the problem is, this kind of technology, I mean, what you're talking about is a whole pile of rocks, right? But, and when the water falls on it and the water comes through it, it leaks out selenium. So how the hell, is technology going to help? And everybody's tried. And certainly if you look at Teck in BC and Glencore, they spent, as far as I remember, somewhere between 1.5 and $2 billion trying to stop this, and they can't. And there's arguments, well, it's an older coal mine, and well, we could have done it differently. But in the joint review, in the hearings on Grassy Mountain originally, they came up with, new ways, their supposed new ways to deal with it. And the joint review panel, they had very, very talented, knowledgeable people, and they turned it down and said, what you're proposing, we don't think will work. So then you say, well, what's changed since they proposed that? And the answer is nothing. Nobody's come up with a better idea. So the water is a huge issue, and the real issue is, once you get it in the water, you can't stop it. And so it gets in the plant life and it gets everywhere, and it gets, to the point where our agricultural industry in southern Alberta would be at risk. So, there's been a number of plant biologists and scientists that have sort of looked at it and said, you really need to understand how these plants take up the selenium from the water and how irrigation is putting it right into the plants. So, the challenge is if you're willing to destroy, the ag industry in southern Alberta for the sake of these coal mines, right? That's basically the deal. You're taking the risk. And the part of the problem in southern Alberta is the Oldman River is the source of water for almost all of southern Alberta. And B, everything flows into the Oldman River before it gets to Saskatchewan. So you've now got everything coming in. So that's a big, big challenge. The drought conditions that we have make it worse because less water, higher concentrations, right? If you put more sugar in your coffee, it gets sweeter, right? And if you put less coffee in, you can get it all to taste nothing but sugar. So it's a challenge on the waterfront, and we don't have enough. We've already, if you look at sort of how much water we have, and you might have seen last spring, I guess, a year, yeah, how they had to cut back everybody's allocations of water because of the drought. So the amount of water we have changes every year. It's not going up, it's going down. So now the mining guys are going to need somewhere around 900,000 million cubic feet of water a year, which is a big allocation out of that already limited allocation. So, and they could be putting selenium into that water that they're taking out, right? So um, that's just sort of one of these like, why would you ever think about doing this? And I can tell you from my own back when we were doing the engagement on the Coal Policy Committee. Um, every municipality in Alberta that's affected by this was their number one concern. And I would say I had at least two MD councils look at me and say, Bill, um, the risk isn't worth it. Like, it's just the risk isn't worth it to risk our water for these mines. And that's sort of, you then get to the current, speeches and not yaks, but yeah, justifications by um, the Minister of Energy and the Premier saying, well, the world needs steel, and to make steel, you need metallurgical coal, and we have metallurgical coal. And so if you want to have a car or a windmill or whatever, you need metallurgical coal. So don't tell us not to do it, because then you won't have cars and you won't have windmills and you won't have anything, right? And it's sort of one of those very specious arguments because a just a quick dialogue on this, but China produces 80% of the steel in the world. And I can promise you well, I cannot promise you, but they equivalently use 80% of the world's metallurgical coal. The vast majority of it comes from Australia. And so they've had a very nice relationship, Australia, with China on sending them iron ore and metallurgical coal. So what's happened is China's demand for steel has dropped dramatically, and it's largely because their building boom is over. And if I can just give you a couple of good quotes here that you'll like. So um, the with that change, the Chinese steel industry is really struggling. And I'll give you the head of the largest steel company in China, and I can get you his name. But basically said, we are in a horrible problem that's going to last a long time. Then the next thing was Australian government came out and said their exports of coal to China are going to drop dramatically from $61 billion to 42 billion. So like a 50% drop in their coal export value. They think the price is going to drop by a similar amount. And this was the Department of Industry for the government of Australia. So, the fact is the demand side of this, right, is just going away quickly. And so, if you look at why it's bad for Alberta, it's pretty simple. If these guys think I'll give you one last statistic, one last piece. This is my, Australia just approved 5 new metallurgical coal mines. So, so if you were an investor, if you're an Albertan saying, what industries would you like to invest in? It seems to me absolutely insane to say, let's take a huge risk to our agricultural industry to try and sell coal in a declining market against a big, big competitor and against a country that we don't really have a great relationship with, right? Like, why would you do that? I mean, if it was your money, you'd say, I think I'll go do something else with it. So it's totally unclear why our Alberta government is so keen on doing this when the economics make no sense. And even the Joint Review Panel said the economics don't make sense way back then. So we have a situation where the risks are huge, the benefits are minuscule at best, right? What are you doing? And that's the question we've been asking, right? And you can't get an answer, right? You get an answer, well, we've got lawsuits, right? And, okay, we've always had lawsuits, right? And they always ask for way, way more than they think they'll ever get. And the companies, there's lots of precedent for what happens when a government takes over a property or a piece of land or something, right? I mean, that's been done since time immemorial. So this idea that we're afraid of the lawsuits, is kind of weird, right? Like, why would the government of Alberta be afraid of a lawsuit, for God's sakes, right? Um, so this is the mystery everybody's trying to unravel. What is going on here? And there's all kinds of conspiracy theories and so on. But I mean, the one character that keeps popping up is Gina Reinhardt, who is the owner of the Grassy Mountain mine, and so she she um, originally Grassy Mountain was owned by a company called Benga. And Benga was, you know, a little Calgary-based company that had bought some property down there on speculation, hadn't paid a whole lot for it, but thought they'd do a bit of exploration. And they then uh, brought in a partner called Riversdale Resources to help them figure out whether they could have a mine there or not. And that's when they started. When Riversdale got involved is when they put in their first application for a mine. Um, and they were sent back 11 times to fix their application. And over a period of about 4 years. And during that period, Gina Reinhardt bought Riversdale Resources for $600 million. So this little property that Benga owned, that I don't know what the original price they paid for it, wasn't much, right? Because it was an abandoned mine site. Now she's into it for $600 million. And you go, okay, so if I was her, I'm annoyed because I didn't spend the $600 million thinking I'd get turned down. And so I think there's a big question mark around that, and why she would be so confident to flop down $600 million to buy a property. So that's kind of the big picture. I don't know if that all makes sense or not. It's a bit of a ramble, but
No, it's good. I think it's a good summation of sort of the
yeah,
story so far. Couple things I want to try to, well, I have a list I was making as you were going. A couple things I want to try to. First of all, yes, absolutely did watch the press conference.
yeah,
Got so much material out of it because, I mean, I go, God bless reporters like Emma Graney,
yeah.
because she's the one who's like, you're being a bit disingenuous, aren't you, Minister? And he was like, no, I'm just saying words.
Just saying.
You keep saying that you will not allow open pit coal mining, but that's quite disingenuous given the fact that this will not apply to, for example, Grassy Mountain or any other exempt project, which will be open pit coal mining. And I know you're saying no new open pit, but when you're saying no open pit mining and this doesn't apply to Grassy Mountain, how do you expect Albertans to actually look at this and say, yeah, no, that's a fair go, let's go for it?
Well, Emma, I appreciate the question. I hope they look at us and say, wow, that's smart. What a smart government.
But I think, one of the other things that went on in that press conference, and I think it was probably the most telling bit, was one of the very last questions where Environment and Parks Minister Rebecca Schultz was asked, can you guarantee that there won't be any selenium leakage? And she was like, well, we just make the rules and the AAR is arm's length, which I don't know if we can say that anymore.
Right.
But there'll be consequences if there's leaks.
So will you guarantee that there won't be a selenium problem if Grassy Mountain goes ahead?
Here's what I would say. Our job in the Department of Environment is to set the environmental standards. The AER is then the arm's length regulator who ensures that any and all companies, no matter where they are in the province of Alberta, but especially so in southern Alberta, where water and these types of concerns have been raised, that they are adhering to those high standards. If they are not, obviously the AER as the regulator has a number of levers to ensure that they are either brought into compliance or they are not operating in the province of Alberta.
And it was like, yes, Rebecca, there will be consequences. There will be terrible consequences.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. No, it's weird, right? At the beginning of that, they said they're going to have regulations that say there will no selenium will go into the water, right? And you go, well, how can you make that statement? Like,
Yeah.
what do you know that nobody else knows, right? And then when Rebecca Schultz get asked the question, oh, well, the AER will figure that out, right? Well, the AER doesn't have any ability to go and do research and testing on selenium removal. They got to rely on the coal company to say they can do it. And to date, they haven't been able to prove they can do it.
Well, and I go back to the two of the big things that I go back to when it comes to the AR. No disrespect to the AR, but the two things that I go back to whenever the UCP trots out the AR as like, oh no, we've got the AR though, and they're arm's length. A, one of the conversations that we've had in the course of doing this project, it's come up multiple times. There hasn't been a single coal project in Alberta in the last like 50 to 100 years that hasn't had some sort of environmental issue, leakage, catastrophe, call it what you will. So there's no track record to say, oh no, you can do coal without any consequences. But the other piece of for me, when it comes to the AER, is, and again, no disrespect to the energy industry, the province needs it. There's no question, but there's been multiple issues in northern Alberta when it comes to water quality and when it comes to tailings ponds, and all of this stuff has happened on the AER's watch. So the AER is not a preventative mechanism; it's a response mechanism. And when the UCP and the provincial government present the AER's role as a preventative one, it's that to me is profoundly disingenuous.
Right, right, yeah. Well, um, I'll give you there's the mines up. We went and toured two of the mines up there, right? One Vista, and the other one, the one that was run by Tech, and I think of the name. But the Tech one was interesting because it was just in the process of being shut down, and they have done an unbelievable job of restoring the landscape, right? Like they've come up with some of the best, new innovative ideas how to do it. Like the old ideas were just level it all off, throw some grass seed on it, and hope like hell it grows, right? And these guys have come up with ways to really quickly restore the original vegetation. And give them full marks for that. So, then, down at the bottom, there's a creek running out, right? So, I asked the question, so how are you dealing with selenium? Can't. So don't know how, right? And part of the problem is it's too late, right? Like, you once you've disturbed all this rock, the selenium's coming out of the rock one way or the other, and you know, you can't stop it. Like it takes 100 years for it to all leach out, so it's all gone, right? So, that's kind of the example. And the problem with the AER is, they say we'll monitor it, right? But if you look at the results of their monitor, they actually stopped monitoring the Cloud River, and one of their scientists actually published a big article about the fact that the reason they stopped doing it was the selenium levels are so high, it was kind of embarrassing. So seriously, look it up. It was quite a mess, right? So, the when the government says the AER is the best regulator and we're the most responsible country in the world for doing this kind of mining, it's one of those things that nobody can figure out whether it's true or false. Like, so you can say it because nobody can tell you you're wrong, because you're going to have to go, and look at US and other countries that may have different ones than us, but you can't prove we're the best and you can't prove we're the worst. So, it keeps going back to, what is it about this coal mines that, this government just can't stop pursuing? Simplistically, and I'm not it's not really the AER, but if you look at the royalties, and they're going to talk about new royalties, but um, the amount of royalties that they would get from these coal mines barely amounts to a day's worth of oil production. So why don't we just do another that expand the oil sands a little bit, right? And away we go. So it's not money that's driving these guys to want these coal mines, and so I don't know what it is. I hope somebody finds out one day.
Do you think like one of the things that has come up time and time again is it seems like when this whole process started up, Northback launched what is now Northback launched a charm offensive on the folks in the Crow's Nest Pass, the folks in the Piikani Nation. They really, really leaned into, oh, you guys, this is going to be the best thing ever, going to be so great, going to solve all your problems, monorail. And the there's very real questions as to whether or not that would be brought to bear. But, there have been lots of anecdotal reports of when Danielle Smith was doing her leadership run. Um, she spent time in the Crow's Nest Pass, and she made a lot of promises to people in the Crow's Nest Pass. Do you think there's almost a feedback loop of, well, Northback said this was going to be really, really good, and Blairmore has some very real economic problems. Coleman has some very real economic problems. Um, this is presented to them as a solution. They go, oh, we'd like that solution, please. Then the whole process explodes because it turns out it's not actually a solution. Danielle Smith comes in and says, oh no, I'll make it happen because I don't know anything about coal mining. Um, do you think that contributes in any way?
Um, well, I think my experiences with the Crow's Nest Pass is there really is two groups there, um, and the one group that's very vocal is kind of the old guard, and every time I've talked to them, it's been, well, my granddaddy mined coal and my daddy mined coal, and I think I should have the right to mine coal too, right? And you go, I hate to tell you what my grandfather did. And, I wouldn't want to be asking to do what he did. um, but and I think they're kind of um, that mindset that I was talking to my wife about this, but human beings have this really great ability to remember the good things and just blank out on the bad things, right? So when I think these guys think back, to the good old days, right? Basically the 50s and 60s were great days for everybody. I mean, the whole country was on a roll, right? The world was. And so everybody kind of remembers those days, politicians were honest, everybody could live by a handshake, we didn't have immigration issues, we're all the same color, right? All that stuff. So I think they're kind of stuck there. Um, but if you look outside of, the people are actually now starting to move into that area, and they don't live right in the town of Blairmore. They don't live right in the towns, but they have property, right? Whole different breed of people. I have a little anecdote for you, just to tell you how different a people it is. So they have a fabulous, Northback, or the precursor, upgraded the golf course down there because they needed the land to get to the mine, so they did a deal, right? Unbelievably beautiful golf course, like just world-class golf course, right? And the town owns it, right? And it has now become a huge tourist draw, right? So everybody, does their little golf trip. They used to go up to Radium and then down to Kimberley and then, back to Calgary, right? Now they all go the other way and make a stop at Crow's Nest Pass along the way and play golf there and have a really nice meal. And away we go. So anyways, I changed my name and went and played golf there because I thought if I used my real name, they would probably not allow me to play. So we're going along, and the marshal, young guy, like mid 30s, kind of friendly, right? And I thought I'll just ask him how he's doing. And he says, I'm doing great. I said, well, how come you're doing so great? And he says, well, before this golf course and before this sort of area got more tourists to it, my house was worth $30,000. And he said, I just sold it for $250,000 and bought a brand new house. So, the people down there know what a valuable area they have, right? Um, they and they're it's not Blair Painter, the mayor, um, and it's not Lisa Sugartech, the town newspaper writer and counselor, but it is people like this guy who's all of a sudden life has just turned great from being not so great. Um, and the land and the property down there, values are going up. Part of the problem is that they're not taxed by these town councils, like because they're just outside the towns, like they're kind of acreages, right? So they're not allowed. They weren't allowed to vote in that referendum. So it's anyways, it's a shame that an area like that, so beautiful, and so able to support all kinds of things if it weren't for coal mining. Because once you put a coal mine in, you can go 30 miles west of there to where the Elk Valley is, and I can guarantee you there's no tourism there. I mean, the people that live there have to wash their cars every day, and they can't hang their clothes out to dry, and they can't drink the water, and like who wants that? So the opportunity is there down there for a change, but that's not the way my granddaddy made a living, right? So it's sad, and it's really too bad. And that's what everybody's upset about, because almost everybody that I know has driven down Highway 22 and turned right and into to go to Fernie or to go to wherever, right? And they're all awestruck every time. And now you go, okay, well, forget taking that road. That's not going to work anymore.
Do you think, like, one of the things that the difference between the tourism piece, and that's a fascinating anecdote that you shared there, because I think it really does underscore the direct economic value of what tourism could be. I mean, one of the people that we spoke to called the Crow's Nest past currently the poor man's Banff. And certainly that potential, I think, exists. But do you think that the province, is there an argument to be made that if the province chose to invest into the tourism industry down there instead of the coal industry, not only would it be not an environmental catastrophe in the making, but it would also be a much more sustainable model for that whole area?
Absolutely, because part of it is, um, if you look at the golf course, right? I swear to God, you cannot get a tee time. And the hotel across the street, full from opening day to closing day. And the only, you've got to be really on your game to get a tee time there. So that's just a golf course, right? And I think I'll tell you a little anecdote. My family, when way, way, way back in the 50s, had a cabin in Canmore, just along the Bow River. And we used to go up there for the summer and spend the summer up there. And it was an old coal mining town, right? And my dad, as a little guy, but, he would drag me downtown to meet with his buddies. And they would all sit around in the old hotel drinking beer, and the miners would all be there and talking about, their issues and so on, right? Look at Canmore now. You know where the most expensive property in Canada is? Canmore. And what have they got? They basically the same environment as Crow's Nest Pass, right? Um, and it's people want to live in places like that now. And if you look at Canmore, it's not just you know people moving out of Calgary or Lethbridge down there. It's people in Canmore. Most of them, this is their second home, right? So all good. The problem with coal mining jobs is they go up and down like a yo-yo. And, you know, um, the I talked about the economics. So most coal mines operate on the basis that if they can get the coal to a market at a good price, they'll dig it all up and ship it all out, right? If the prices drop, it doesn't make it worthwhile to dig it up. So they just shut everything down. And if you look at BC, they've had a number of these mines like this, and they've all just done this big yo-yos, right? So, you have a job, well, no, you're laid off for 3, 6, 8 months while the prices come back or something comes back, and then you come back to work, right? And that's not great. The second part that's not great is automation. So most of the operations now on modern coal mines are automated. So the trucks, little control room somewhere, and a guy sitting there, driving the truck around the mine, right? And so the number of jobs is actually lowered quite a lot. And it's safer and it's cheaper than people because you can run those trucks with no drivers 24 hours a day, where you got to have 3 shifts of guys and it's expensive, right? So I think that the short-sightedness of a coal mine versus what you could do, to make it a mecca for people. People love the mountains, right? And then you see that in Alberta all the time, and they're more than willing to invest in it, and they're more than willing. So I don't think it would take much of the government to, really help that along there. I mean, if they really cared, right?
Yeah. And
Uh,
I mean, Camler's not the only example. It's a very, very good example because it really is apples to apples in a lot of
yeah,
ways. But there's lots of other areas in Alberta as well. I've used the Drumheller Valley as
yeah,
a
yeah,
look
yeah,
up times. They exist and have actually grown, which is if you've ever been to Drumheller. I lived in Drumheller, so I have some lingering trauma. But the fact that that town has been able to sustain and in some years grow purely off of the tourism
yeah,
is a huge testament to how effective that pivot can be, I think.
yeah. I have a great story. I have a 4-year-old grandson, and when the parents asked him where he'd like to go for his birthday, he said, "I want to go see the dinosaurs." And so we went with them down to Drumheller for 4 days, and it's fabulous. We had a blast. And everything from the museums, obviously, like unbelievable, right? But the Barney's Park and the hoodoos, and like it is, and the town is really nice. Like it was fine, right? So yeah, I mean, I think that's a great example. Um, but and it's sad, right? If you think about um, all that coal dust blowing around, and all the problems with water, who's going to want to do that? Like right?
Well, and it's one of the things that has been most striking to me as we've gone through the process of putting together this package of episodes is I did not realize that there is the Blairmore Creek that literally runs down the side of Grassy Mountain,
Yeah,
literally right beside the mine site. That
yeah,
feeds into the Crow's Nest River, which feeds into the Old Man Reservoir, which feeds into the Old Man River, which feeds into literally all of southern Alberta. And I think that if people haven't spent time in southern Alberta, the awareness of what the limitations are on the agriculture without the water, without all of the irrigation that was created. I mean, if you want to talk about monumental engineering projects, the irrigation network that was put in southern Alberta in order to make that land viable for agriculture is like to hell with the pyramids.
right. So one of the challenges now is, um, you know who McCain's is? Potato guys, right? So they are making a huge investment in southern Alberta. I think they want to spend $650 million to build a new plant there that'll employ 500 people. And they're completely dependent on the potatoes. And the potatoes are completely dependent on the water. And I think they're going to get more and more anxiety about making that investment if if they think there's a risk to the water, whether it's the amount of water or the quality of the water. Like they're not, other countries have very, very strict requirements about selenium in their food. Um, and there's been cases where uh, China has rejected crops from Alberta because of selenium, and it was a while ago. But I mean, they test for it, right? So if you, I can't imagine being McCain's and saying, we're going to basically bet our company on, you know, how to grow potatoes and market potatoes around the world from contaminated water. So another point. The uh, the McCain people are very responsible. And I don't know how much you know about this, but so what they've done is say that if you want to sell us potatoes, you have to use regenerative farming techniques, which basically says you got to really respect the environment, right? And the whole 9 yards. So these are people with a long term view of the world. And if they pull out, that's a huge loss to Southern Alberta. I guarantee you, there's no 500 jobs, 1,000 jobs that are good forever out of a coal mine.
Yeah. I want to we're coming up to the end of the time that you committed
Yeah.
to. So I want to end on a positive note because I think you do have some insight on some positivity that people should be able to take away from this conversation. And I want to go back to what you were talking about in regards to the I mean not only your experience with the initial iteration of this where it was shut down, but also, you talked about the gas well stuffs on your property as well. And the fact that the landowners association was able to in effect fight back. I'm probably
Right.
oversimplifying, but I know that there's a lot of people who are looking at the very bad press conference and sort of the dismissive tone of Brian Jean and Rebecca Schultz, and the fact that they disregarded, and for all intents and purposes, all of the work that you and the Coal Policy Committee did. Um, it's easy to get discouraged, but you have also been a part of several things where it's been demonstrated that people can use their voices to say, no, not on my watch. So I'm wondering if you could talk about that for a couple of minutes to wrap things up.
Well, I think LLG has a huge amount of respect in what we do, and the reason we have so much respect is, it's very much fact based. It's very much, understanding what needs to be done, what could be done. So we've done a number of these things where, I thought it's hopeless, right? But we have some very, very committed people, and not a lot, but what it turns out is if you take the time, and we have a great group, take the time to really understand the issue and understand it as well as or better than the people that are proposing either the pipeline or the transmission lines, um, and use the regulatory processes, you can win. And Grassy Mountain was an example. The original Grassy Mountain was an example. And the other thing that I will say on a very positive note is on this coal thing, um, people really care. Um, so, uh, we only LLG's doesn't have a big budget, and most of it is donations. Um, the day of that Coal Brian Jean announcement, I think we got $1,800 the next day, you know, more than that. So, it's Alberta is you grew up, I grew up, we spent quite a bit of time in Manitoba. And, there's issues there, right? They've got all kinds of issues there. And we have my wife grew up there and she's very committed to it. But one of the things you really notice the difference between Manitoba and Alberta is the willingness in Alberta of people to stand up and be heard and push, right? And you don't see that in a lot of other places. It's all sort of, well, that's the government. I guess we just got to let it happen. Not much we can do, right? I haven't met a single person in Alberta that won't stand up and be counted for what they think. And, and it's not partisan, right? Like these kind of things aren't conservative or NDP or, any of that stuff. I mean, this is our land, this is our province, and we're enormously proud of it. And it's a very great province. I mean, it's the one place everybody in the country wants to live. So, it's absolutely worth fighting for. And, our group, is all the same. I mean, everybody's willing to put their time and effort into fighting these things. And, it's not easy. Like you feel kind of defeated at times when you see those announcements like that. But the people of Alberta will win this out. I'm convinced that enough people and politicians are politicians, right? I mean, you don't have to look too far to find out that if they think the wind's blowing the other way, they'll quickly change direction, right, and go with the wind. They don't like sailing into the wind. So I'm pretty sure that the government will have to reconsider this. Otherwise, there'll be, I mean, the last time this happened, the uproar from the last one was something they'd never seen before. I remember talking to, Sonia Savage about it. She says, this is unbelievable. We've never seen anything like this. We never thought this would happen. So, I think I have enormous faith in the people of Alberta that understand what they have, why they love this province, and why they care about it. And certainly, LLG is sort of an embodiment of that spirit, if you will.
That's awesome. Is there anything else you want people to hear? Is there anything else you want you people to know? The floor is entirely yours, sir.
No, I would like to just kind of reiterate that the issue with coal mines on the eastern slopes is water and economics. And Peter Lougheed, in his day, who's a brilliant man, has a famous quote that said, water is more valuable than oil. So I guarantee you water is more valuable than coal. So just, using his comment. So I think people will come to that realization and realize that we have a very vibrant, progressive agricultural industry in southern Alberta. I think they recognize that, with climate change, it's going to be very dry. Like last year, the whole reservoir dried up. And that risking our water for some short-term Australian companies to mine some coal, maybe sell it, maybe shut down. Who knows what they're going to do? But eventually it will come back to the public to pay for the mistakes. And the mistake with the coal mines, money won't fix it.
Very true. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your story and chat with us today. I really, really appreciate it, sir. If people want to stay abreast of what's going on with the landowners group, the action, where should they go to do that?
They can certainly go to our website, livingstonlandowners.group.net.ca. And there's I would there's a couple of groups that have been really, really vocal. Water for Food is one group that they should just they have a link to a bunch of articles and they publish things and they're on top of it. So that's the other one I would suggest. And what else can I think of? Who else is really good at this? Company organizations like CPAWS and those kind of organizations are on top of this as well. So I would recommend those. Certainly, they can go to our website and get a link to those other ones.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, sir. I really do appreciate you taking the time.
Okay. Good.
And that's it for another episode of The Breakdown. As always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here, we would love nothing more than if you thought about signing up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where for just the price of a fancy cup of coffee a month, you can help us continue to produce this kind of content. Whether you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, in which case, maybe leave a review and a rating, or whether you're watching it on one of our streaming platforms, we want to say a big thank you to everybody who is part of the Breakdown's audience. And as always, take care of each other and keep the conversation going.